Starting tomorrow, the Quad Cities International Airport is making its pitch to airlines to add more flights in and out of our area. This week, we talked with Ashleigh Davis, who's headed to D.C. for the conference, about how it's more than just a numbers game.
And joining us now is Ashleigh Davis, Public Relations and Marketing Manager for the QC Airport. Ashleigh, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so I was really interested about this event that you are basically embarking on starting tomorrow. Tell me about what this event is.
So we jokingly call it airline airport speed dating, and that is because of the format of these conferences. There are a handful that are hosted each year, and the way that it's set up is that airports request meetings with airlines. Several months ago, this happened. Airports or airlines take in all of those requests and lay them out and decide who they want to meet with, and they'll accept or decline your meeting. If they accept your meeting, you're then slotted in for a 20-minute schedule with them. And you have that 20 minutes once you're at the conference to talk about everything that you think they want to know or need to know about a particular region and the airport. And the goal is really to get that face time with airline network planners to educate them on your airport and your region. And then hopefully when they go back to their headquarters and they're thinking back on all the meetings that they had with airports across the country, there's something about you that stood out, whether it fits in with their network plans or something they hadn't considered before.
All right, so I know you can't necessarily tell me which airlines you're meeting with, but I mean, we all want to get a yes, on a date kind of thing. Have you gotten some meetings scheduled at least?
We do. So we have meetings scheduled, and the goal is always to meet with current carriers and potential new ones. So we never want to limit ourselves to just what's already operating here. We're always thinking ahead about what could be a good fit into the future.
How do you prepare for something like this? I know you've said you've done this in the past, but what are you thinking about, and how are you kind of bringing everything together so that you present sort of a good story to these airlines?
We think a lot about what's the story of our region. So there's a lot of data that is considered during these meetings and year round, to be honest. It doesn't stop and start with these conferences. And there's a lot of data that the airlines already have. So what you have to do is fill in the gaps. What don't they know about your region that would be interesting, that tells you something about the population and how they travel, how they conduct their business, and try and tell that story in a compelling way that also has the numbers and the data to back it up, because they want to know that if they start a route that it's going to be sustainable and successful for the long term, because it's quite an investment on their end to put new planes and crew here, especially when there are still pilot and crew shortages and aircraft shortages as well. So we work with Visit Quad Cities quite a bit and the Quad Cities Chamber of Commerce to get some of that data about our population. And then we also work with a consultant that used to work for airlines himself and has now worked for this agency for many years now and understands the economics of the airlines. So they help bridge the gap between airports and the region and then airlines. And so we sit down, we have slides, we have data that we go through, and you just try to make the most of the time that you have in front of them to tell a compelling story.
When I think about where I would like to see flights out of this airport, I think about effectively where I go most often. So it's always a very selfish decision when I think about it. You have to probably think about it a little bit more broadly. How do you kind of come up with an idea of which airlines you'd like to be part of the airport, which routes you think would be convincing enough to an airline?
A lot of it has to do with knowing how airlines' existing hub and spoke networks are set up. So where are their hubs at that would be good fits for where we're seeing travelers? Again, it's a lot of data, compiling data and trying to find common patterns and threads. Where's a common region that people are trying to get to that they can't easily get to now? But we know that if we only had service to that particular hub, we could easily fill planes because they're already heading that direction. They're just having to take a longer way to get there, or they're having to seek alternative airport options. So you're trying to think and put the puzzle pieces together a little bit that way. And as a regional airport, our role in that hub and spoke network is to feed into those larger hubs. So it's hard for us to say we want nonstop service to Cancun every day, wouldn't we? But that doesn't really make economic sense on the airline side. So they really are the ones that hold all of the decision making power because we're supplying the data. We're trying to show them where our businesses are expanding, where they're coming from, where our residents are trying to get to, particularly for business travel, because that's the most consistent and predictable. And then the airlines say, okay, we know that we have a hub that we're really trying to get up and running, or we have one like Charlotte that we just added that is fantastic for East Coast connections in Florida into the Caribbean and Mexico. That would be a great fit based on the data we're seeing out of the Quad Cities. So it's a little bit of a push and pull between trying to figure out, where are those patterns that we can maybe highlight for the airlines that they weren't necessarily seeing. I think the biggest point to drive home is that airports don't add service, airlines do. So we really don't have any control in the matter or say in the matter. We're really there to be advocates for our airport and for our region. Airlines are the ones that have to go back and ultimately make that decision because they have the crew and the planes. We would add any route we possibly could if it were up to us. It just isn't. And I think sometimes that's hard for people to hear or understand because they think, well, but surely there's something else you could be doing. And it's like there really isn't. There really isn't. We're doing everything we can, and from there, it's up to the airlines to decide what makes sense for them and what they have available.
I have a question that it takes us a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about, but I think it's somewhat related. I grew up right next to an airport, and there was always a friction between more flights and plane noise and traffic and all that stuff. Do you have to balance that as you think about this?
You know what? We are pretty fortunate in that I think one, we're in an area that has a lot of space and real estate around it. So I think we tend to strive to be, or are a good neighbor. Part of the way that we do that is as older homes come up for sale, we will purchase them. We'll offer fair market price and purchase them. And sometimes, they're worth salvaging. Sometimes they aren't because they are so close to an airport and a 10,000-foot runway. So we'll end up just taking that land back. So that way our perimeter extends out far enough that we're not encroaching on neighborhoods and residential areas that are popping up. We also work hard for the space that we have to consider what are the best uses of land around the airport that wouldn't be an impediment on the quality of life. So is it, gas stations, restaurants, stuff like that, hotels, whatever it may be that is a good fit for airports, but is not necessarily residential.
Okay, last question. We talked about this sort of before the interview started. This is all about the long game. You got to think years really in advance. But when you come back from this meeting, from this conference, how do you know that it was successful?
It's hard to tell sometimes because, you're not the only airport that they've met with. So they have a lot to consider when they go back to their headquarters. I think all you can do is supply the best information that you possibly can in an engaging way, make a good connection, put a face to the airport because they're going to go back and have to look at all this information and a big spreadsheet. And you want them to scroll down and think, oh, Quad Cities, I remembered that there was something really interesting about this region. Or I met, someone from the airport that I think is a great resource for us that if we are considering expansion in this area, I know exactly who I can call to get more information. So it can be difficult, but I think being present is successful in and of itself. Letting the airlines know that you're interested in talking with them and getting feedback too. It's not just a one-way conversation. We're asking for their thoughts on how they think the existing routes, if they're already operating here, are performing. If there's anything on the horizon that looks interesting to them that fits with what we're seeing. And then for potential new carriers, it's really talking about the opportunity that we think exists within our region that our passengers would really, I think, make good use of. So it is a long game. It can take years. Charlotte is a great example that was in the works for many, many years, and COVID happened to hit right at a time that we thought it was pretty imminent. And it took, 4 years, almost 4 years for that to come back on the table and finally get launched as it launched late in 2023. So you just have to stay on top of it, make sure that you're just opening those communication lines up and that you know who to contact and they know who to contact if you think something new pops up that they would be interested in.
All right, Ashley, I have learned a lot. I've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for sharing. Good luck, because
Thank
obviously
you.
this affects so many of us in our community.
Thank you so much. It'll be a great time.